Okay, hello, Year 5, back again. Good afternoon, everyone. So, as you might be aware already, our topic is going to focus on the Tudor period. And we're going to look at that in great detail over the next kind of 6 weeks. So where do we start? I think the most important thing is that we need to know who was actually in charge of the country at this time. Okay, so we need to understand when the Tudor period was and who was running the country during this time. So it starts off with a very kind of a complicated series of events. So don't worry if you feel like you're getting bombarded with a lot of information, because there is a lot of information, but we will break it up into bite-sized pieces. So we're going to look at some important characters who led up to the rule of the Tudors. So there were some important events that took place. So here we have a chap called Richard III. Okay, and he had a family called the York family, and this was the symbol of his family. So it was a white rose. Okay, now we have the Lancaster rose, and this represented another family, the Lancasters, and the person who led them was a chap called Henry VII. So what happened? Well, there was a very famous battle called the Battle of Bosworth, and this took place in 1485. And we're going to watch a few clips just to kind of put us in the picture as to what happened at this very important battle, because the outcome of the battle, the winner, led the beginning of the Tudor period. Okay, so this battle took place in 1485. There was only one winner. This is when the first Tudor kind of monarch took over the country. So who do you think it was? Richard III or Henry VII? Okay, who won that battle? You can just see just a little point down here on Henry's picture. You can see that he's carrying this red rose that represented his house or his family, which is very important. And we'll look at the roses again in a moment. So let's move on. Oh, you're going to be making a timeline. I should point that out. Okay. So first, we're just going to watch a short clip of what led up to these guys coming together on the battlefield and having a big fight. Now, this isn't such a serious clip, but it's very, very funny. Okay, let's see if we can make it work. Technology. Let's see if we can go back and make this one work. Fab.
Welcome to the news at when? The 1400s, when the kings of England ended up fighting a gruesome war with their own relatives for the right to the crown. Here with more details is Bob Hale with the War of the Roses report. Bob.
Thank you, Sam. Well, the year is 1453, and that right there is Henry VI, though he could be called Henry the Sick because mentally he's rather ill, so unwell in fact that he can't run the country anymore. So his cousin, Richard Silly Name, turns up and says he'll become Lord Protector, meaning he'll run the country while the king is ill. What a lovely chap. Or is he? You see, 50 years ago, Richard's great-great-grandpa, Richard II, was kicked off the throne by Henry's great-great-grandpa, Henry IV. So these two sides of the family aren't exactly best buddies, which is why the second Henry gets better, he takes back his crown, and fearing that cousin Dickie might still be bearing a bit of a grudge, has him kicked out of court. Boom! Good shot. So what does Dickie do? Well, since Henry is from the house of Lancaster, whose symbol is a red rose, and since cousin Dickie is from the house of York, whose symbol is a white rose, and since this report is on the War of the Roses, well, you can probably see where this is going. Yep, it's war. Dickie Dicky's men, the Yorkies, win the first battle where Henry's Lancastrian army run away. So fast, in fact, they leave poor old King Henry sitting all alone in a tent, having once again fallen ill. So once again, Dicky becomes Lord Protector, and once again, Henry gets better, and once again, Dicky is kicked out of court. Boom! Good shot. Luckily, the Archbishop of Canterbury steps in and sorts the whole thing out by inventing Love Day, where the Yorkies and the Lancastrians walk through the high street holding hands. I'm not even making that bit up. So it's all peace and love and harmony and kissing, although probably not the last one, and that is the end of that. Also, we thought 1459, and Dicky tries again, but fails. Yes, it's the Yorkies' turn to run away this time, but clearly not all that far away, because the very next year, they try yet again. The Battle of Northampton this time, where the Yorkies win, and the Lancastrians run away, leaving Henry behind, again. And he's found all alone in his tent, again. And guess what? He's ill, again. So once again, Dicky becomes Lord Protector, meaning final victory goes to the Yorkies, and that really, really, really is the end of that. Also, we thought Henry might be ill, but his wife refuses to give up. So she nips up to Scotland and borrows an army. And what do you know? Restarts the whole war. She really sops it to the Yorkies at the Battle of Wakefield, which has this effect on old Dicky boy. He's fainted. No, not really. He's only dead. Killed in battle, leaving his son Eddie to pick up where Daddy left off, which is getting beaten by Mrs. Henry. But Eddie's in luck. The people are suspicious of Mrs. Henry's Scottish army and decide they'd rather have young Eddie in charge. So he's crowned, and the Yorkies win, the Lancastrians lose, and that is the end of that. Really, really honestly this time, I promise. Also, we thought, time for the biggest battle of the entire war, though. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. Yep, that's about right. 80,000 soldiers, 20,000 killed. It's a massive, horrible bloodbath. But the final victory go to the Yorkies. Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Henry run away. Eddie has his coronation, becoming King Edward IV, and the country is filled with peace and rainbows and prancing lambs and pretty coloured flowers. But not for long. Eddie falls out with his chief advisor, the Earl of Warwick, which is a bad move because Warwick is also known as the Kingmaker, and he probably makes a king. He brings back, yep, you've guessed it, Henry VI. Remember him? Well, you can forget about him because it's 1471 and Warwick is killed in battle, then Henry is executed, which means Edward can take back the crown for the Yorkies and rule the country very, very nicely for years and years and years and years, and that is the end of the War of the Roses. Really, really, honestly, this time, properly and forever, I swear. Unless you count the bit where Eddie dies and his brother Richard III takes over and then loses the crown to Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth, but that bit's not important. After all, who's ever heard of the Tudors? I know, everyone has. It was only a joke. Honestly, what is it with you people?
Okay, confusing, isn't it? Lots of battles, lots of different people, lots of people with the same name. What's really important about that was the last part. So we are left with these two chaps here, Henry VII and Richard III, who have a battle that took place in 1485, and it was called the Battle of Bosworth. So we're going to watch a less kind of fast-paced clip, and we're going to slow it down a little bit, and we'll see what actually took place at this very, very important battle in English British history. Okay, so it was called the War of the Roses. Remember, each house, each family was represented by two different coloured roses. Okay, so let's have a look what happened.
The Battle of Bosworth took place in 1485 and was one of many battles in the Wars of the Roses. Between the years of 1455 until 1487, England was in a constant state of civil war, as two factions, the House of York and the House of Lancaster, fought each other for the English throne. In 1483, Richard III of the House of York was crowned king, but with suspicions that he had played a part in the murder of the princes in the Tower, Richard was an unpopular king. Opponents to Richard encouraged the exiled last Lancastrian heir Henry Tudor to invade England. Henry's army landed in Wales and gained support as they marched east to Bosworth. King Richard III had about 12,000 men. Positioned on a hill, his forces consisted of archers, spearmen, cavalry and some cannons. The Duke of Norfolk commanded the front line, Richard the centre and the Duke of Northumberland at the back. Henry's army only had about 5,000 men, consisting of archers, cavalry and spearmen. The Earl of Oxford was given command and Henry took position at the back with a group of bodyguards. A third army was also present on the battlefield that day. Lord Stanley and his brother Sir William had an army of about 5,000 soldiers. Both Richard and Henry had tried to gain their support, but they had not pledged their allegiance to either side. Their forces were positioned where they could quickly intervene on either side if needed. The battle started when the two forces began firing huge volleys of arrows at each other. The Duke of Norfolk followed up this action by leading his army down the hill. When his men reached the front line, they engaged in hand-to-hand combat with the Duke of Oxford's army. To avoid being enveloped, Oxford had instructed his soldiers to stay in a close formation, protecting his flanks by the cavalry. The tactics worked. Despite fierce fighting, Norfolk's army could not break down the strong formation of Oxford's men, and they began to be pushed back. With losses mounting, some of Norfolk's soldiers started to flee the battlefield, leaving their formation even weaker. To provide backup, Richard ordered Northumberland's army to join the attack. But for an unknown reason, Northumberland did not follow his king's orders, and his men refused to move. With his army failing, Richard spotted Henry on the battlefield and decided that killing him might finish the battle. With a few hundred of his closest supporters and friends, the king raced down the hill towards Henry. Richard's attack smashed straight into Henry's defence, killing his standard-bearer. When Henry's bodyguard began to suffer major losses, William Stanley, who until now had only been observing the battle, ordered his forces to assist Henry. With this intervention, Richard and his group were surrounded. Undeterred by losing his horse and his followers being killed, Richard kept fighting until he was outnumbered and hacked to death. Seeing that their king was dead, Richard's army fled the battlefield. At the end of the battle, the losses for Henry's army were about 100, but Richard's forces lost around 1,000. This was a victory for Henry. Richard's body was paraded publicly and then thrown in an unmarked grave. His skeleton was rediscovered in 2013 under a car park in Leicester. Henry VII was crowned the new King of England on the battlefield, beginning a 100-year reign of the Tudor dynasty.
Okay, interesting to see the battle kind of unfold there and what actually happened. So although Richard III had more men, more soldiers, Henry was able to defeat him and become the first Tudor monarch. Okay, and again, it was really interesting. I remember about 10 years ago on the news that they'd found this skeleton underneath a car park, and they dug it up and they did a DNA check, and they found out that it was in fact the skeleton of Richard III, which I thought was amazing. We might have a little look at that in more detail later on. Great stuff, guys. So what we've got to focus on is the timeline from this period, from the battle to the end of the Tudor leadership. Okay, so let's move on. So we need to have a look at the people who ran the country. They're called monarchs. There was something else that we picked up on in the first clip, I think, and it said that Britain had a civil war. When you have a civil war, it means that the country is fighting within itself. Okay, so it's not being invaded by a different country. It's actually, there's a fight within itself to overthrow the power. Okay, the people at the top. So that's called a civil war. So here we have Henry VII and his reign. So when he was on the throne was between 1485, Battle of Bosworth, to 1509. So if you want to work out, you could work out a timeline and record how many years he was in power. Okay, so who came next? Who came next? Well, this man, hopefully some of you will recognise him. He is in fact Henry VIII, and we're going to be looking at his reign in more detail as we go through our topic this term. So he took over and his reign ended in 1547. Okay, just try and think, what facts do you know about Henry VIII? Now, after he died, Edward VI took over, and his reign lasted until 1553. Now, he was quite a young chap. Okay, so looking at the portrait, again, you can see the style of clothing that people were wearing during Tudor times. And again, we might be looking at fashion and jewellery throughout the topic as well. So that was the first 3 monarchs. All you've got to remember is there were 6. Okay, so 6. We're halfway through on our timeline. So you can see at the bottom there, we've got up to 1553. So who took over? We had Lady Jane Grey. Now she took over, but her rule only lasted for 9 days. So not even a year, not even 2 weeks, 9 days. And then she was succeeded on the throne by this lady who looks very, very kind of stern. I wouldn't want to mess around with her. She was called Mary. Okay, so she was Mary first, and she took over in 1553, so the same year, because Lady Jane Grey only lasted for 9 days, and she had a short reign, and she left the throne in 1558. So you can work out how long she was on the throne for. And then she was taken over by this person. Some of you might recognise her. Very important person. Just by looking at her fashion alone is a huge statement of her wealth and power. Okay, and this woman was Elizabeth I. Okay, so Queen Elizabeth I. And her reign lasted until 1603, and that was the end of the Tudor monarchy. So we had 6 rulers during that period in time, and you might have worked out the maths. It lasted for 118 years. Okay, now a lot happened in those 118 years, and Britain really became more of a modern society at this point. So what we're going to do now, and you can make notes as we go along, because not only do I want you to create a timeline, I'd like you to include some facts as well about each of the monarchs. So maybe 2 or 3 facts to include with your timeline, or you could write underneath your timeline about these people. So I'll read through the facts. You can decide what you're going to include information wise on your own timelines. Okay, so Henry Tudor was born in Pembroke Castle in Wales. He fled to Brittany, which is in France, when he was 12 years old because he was in danger. He returned and he fought Richard III in the Battle of Bosworth. And remember, when he came back to this country, he landed in Wales. He won the battle and was crowned king on the battlefield. He was the king who united the White Rose of York and the Red Rose of Lancashire to make the Tudor Rose by marrying Elizabeth of York. So if we have a look at that rose to the right of him, you can see it incorporates or includes the red rose and the white rose, and this became the Tudor Rose. So he brought both families together through his marriage to Elizabeth of York. So that's where we're starting on our timeline. Okay, now here we are back with Henry VIII, and let's find out some information about him. So he was a powerful and fierce monarch. Okay, we're going to look closely at Henry VIII during our English and topic. He's one of the most famous Tudors in history. He had 6 total marriages in his lifetime. He's also famous for making changes within the Roman Catholic Church. And a little a rhyme to help you remember what happened to his wives is divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Okay, so he had 6 wives, and that was what happened to each one of them. So just have a little practice of that rhyme and see if you can remember it, and we'll have a look at his wives as we go through our topic this term. So that's some information about Henry. Great. Now we come to Edward VI. He was Henry VIII's only son to his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour. He was the King of England for only a few years. He became king at the age of 9. Can you imagine becoming king of the country at the age of 9? So round about your age, imagine that, what you could do to the country. Might have a little discussion about that in our bubble. He died at the age of 15, so he was a teenager when he died. He was a Protestant and made England a Protestant country, and we're going to come back and have a look at that term later on, so don't worry if you don't understand that word or you haven't heard that word used before, but it's all to do with belief and religious beliefs. Okay, so we'll delve into that a little bit more later on. So moving on, we have Lady Jane Grey. Now remember, she was on the throne for just 9 days. She was the Queen. 4 days after Edward VI's death, Jane was proclaimed Queen. Okay, she was crowned Queen. Edward VI wanted to keep a Protestant on the throne. Mary, who was the rightful heir to the throne, rode down to London 9 days later and imprisoned Jane and her supporters. Jane and her husband were held in the Tower of London until they were executed. So which Mary are we thinking about? Which Mary did not agree with this? Okay, have a look, think. Mary the First. Okay, and we've already said, have a good look at her face. Not someone that you would mess around with. So Mary Tudor was the only born child to Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. She was very popular with the rest of England. She completely reversed all the religious changes of Edward, as she was a Roman Catholic, not a Protestant. Okay, people that did not agree with her changes would be burnt at the stake, so tied to a pole and burnt. This is why her nickname was Bloody Mary. Okay, she was a ruthless leader and really meant business, so she would make an example of people that did not agree with her. And we're going to again be looking at crime and punishment through the Tudor age as well. So some really kind of like horrible, some horrible things would happen to you if you did something wrong. Okay. When she married Philip II of Spain to bring the two countries together, nobody accepted the marriage, and England began to resent her, which means the people, the citizens of England, didn't really like her, and they no longer wanted to follow her. Right, so who came next? Mary the First, 1558. So this lady, can you remember her name? Okay, so it was Elizabeth I. Now, her reign is often known as the Elizabethan age. She was the daughter of Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. I'm kind of thinking we need a family tree here. I don't know about you. See who is connected to who and in what way. So maybe next week we shall look at making a family tree. She never married and never had any children. She's often pictured wearing thick white makeup, which she wore to cover up smallpox scars. So you can see she's got a very, very pale face. And actually that type of makeup did a lot of damage to her face. So I wonder if you can find out anything about that, what Tudors wore on their skin as makeup and why it could cause damage. She reigned for nearly 45 years, so quite a long time on the throne. She led the English navy to beat the Spanish Armada. Okay, fantastic. Lots of things to think about there, year 5, but again, I just want you to be really clear as to who was on the throne and when during the Tudor reign. Okay, so you're going to make your timeline. Now, we've made timelines before. We made timeline when we were looking at Neil Armstrong up to Tim Peake and all that kind of thing, a space timeline. So this time we're just going to focus on that 118 years and who was on the throne. So you're going to need to use dates and you're going to need to use names as well, and also include some facts about each one of those rulers. Now, in the resource area, I'm just going to put some images of those rulers. So you could either have a look at them and you could draw them, okay? Have a look at their clothing, how it differs. How could you make each picture look individual? Or you could print them out, cut them out and stick them on your timeline, okay, if you wanted to. In the bubble, I think we're going to have a go at drawing them. Remember, also include 2 or 3 facts to go along with those rulers so you get to grips with them. Right, good. Have a really good afternoon. I hope you enjoy doing that activity. You can do your own research at home, find out more information about those rulers and that period in time, and I will come back to you tomorrow morning. So have a great afternoon. I'm going to say cheerio guys, see you later.